A sealed document brings definitive news. The engagement to Grand Duchess Valdrova has just been finalized. Standing before the young man, an older man says that he knows exactly what this decision means. That young man is named Ferda Rusnova, an engagement to the Grand Duchess. For a nobleman, those words were practically a death sentence. There were only two choices left: refuse the engagement and be banished from the family, or accept it and be torn apart. But what Ferda wanted most was to belong to that family. The memory takes him back to his childhood. Ferda was the frail third son of a family of knights born to a concubine. A group of servants watched Ferda train alone, commenting that the third young master insisted on training yet again. One of them added that the boy's efforts were pathetic since he had absolutely no talent. Ferda had no one by his side. Even so, he endured. He believed that if he kept trying and trying, one day he would be recognized. A man watched him through the window with a gentle smile. That thought made Ferda smile, filled with hope. It was then that a white-haired boy approached, claiming to have heard an interesting rumor about Ferda. The boy mockingly asked if Ferda had really started night training. But it seemed he was mistaken about something. Shortly afterward, Ferda was lying defeated on the ground while the boy's voice echoed, saying that Ferda had never had the right to train in the first place. The boy added that Ferda's blue eyes were disgusting. A tear escaped the young man's eyes. Ferda only wanted to be recognized as part of the family, but the family's attention had long since turned away from him. Ferda went to his father and declared that he would leave the family. His father stared at him coldly. His response was brief. He simply agreed. Ferda stopped at the gate, taking one last look at the mansion. Behind him, a voice declared that he was no longer a Rusnova. Ferda's father knew how hard he had worked. Even so, it had never mattered. Something changed in his eyes. He swore that he would never forgive his father. He reinforced his vow, promising to make his father regret throwing him away. He walked away alone, leaving everything behind. That was the day Ferda became a mage. He awakened his magical power at the age of 18. Someone knocked Ferda down, laughing at the idea of him becoming a mage at that age. Compared to the other apprentices, Ferda was already starting far behind. Other apprentices mocked him, saying it would take him decades to understand even the basic principles. They said that every mage used their inner power as their driving force. Ferda replied that it didn't matter if he understood none of it. At that moment, a terrifying power emanated from Ferda, shocking the very same classmates who had mocked him earlier. A red magic circle formed behind him and a magical sphere appeared in his hand. His mana was fueled by hatred and revenge. An explosion of power knocked everyone around him down. The more Ferda hated someone, the stronger he became. Accumulating hatred and vengeance, Ferda reached the sixth circle and became an archmage. The place he decided to return to was his old home, the Rusnova family. Under the full moon, Ferda finally arrived at the Rusnova mansion. He forced the servants who had once insulted him to kill one another. He also made the family's first and second sons come to hate each other. Then he destroyed both brothers together. Finally, only his father remained, the man Ferda held the deepest grudge against. Cornered, his father begged Ferda to kill him. His father screamed desperately, begging to be killed once and for all. Coldly, Ferda told him to look closely and asked if this wasn't the proud Rusnova family that he himself had built. Upon seeing the hell before his eyes, his father completely lost his mind. And so, everything that had once been connected to the Rusnova family ceased to exist. Ferda simply sighed, but to him it still wasn't enough. His hatred and rage did not diminish and eventually spread across the entire continent. In response, countless powerful warriors raised their swords against him. Groups of warriors accused Ferda of hiding his crimes behind pretty words, saying that destroying an entire family wasn't enough. He also kept killing without end. They declared him the enemy of the continent, swearing that they would bring him to justice. Dozens of warriors surrounded Ferda that night, ready to attack him all at once. But once again, he survived and reached the 8th circle, the highest level a human could attain. Ferda had become a great mage. Even so, he knew that the resentment against him would never disappear and that sooner or later people would try to take revenge on him just as he had done. So he decided he needed to become strong enough to crush anyone who stood against him. Thus, Ferda began his search for the 9th circle, the realm of demigods. He needed absolute power. In an ancient grimoire, Ferda discovered the ultimate ingredient required to reach that level. When he saw what it was, he wondered if it wasn't a cruel twist of fate. The ingredient was the heart of the Crimson Dragon, the Grand Duchess Valdrova herself. Ferda needed her heart. Fate was truly cruel, Ferda thought as he walked alone toward the dragon's lair. Before him, Valdrova finally appeared and recognized him at last. She lamented that the very man who was supposed to become her fiancé had now come to kill her. Wounded in the middle of the battle, Ferda demanded that she die silently by his hand, calling her the tyrant Valdrova. Panting, Valdrova replied that she knew that was what people called her, but she wanted to know why. She said that she had never shown herself to the world, not even before Ferda was born, and that she had always lived in isolation, far away from humans. Finally, she asked what kind of grudge could generate so much hostility. Ferda stared at Valdrova in disbelief, asking if she really had never done anything to him. Ferda claimed that she was the cause of all his misery. Pointing at the dragon, Ferda shouted that her greed for a human fiancé was the reason he had been expelled from his own family. Valdrova questioned whether that was really her fault. Ferda answered categorically that it was. Completely consumed by rage, Ferda shouted that a dragon's greed for a human partner was the cause of all his misery, demanding that she understand that. Valdrova calmly questioned whether that was really the case. Suddenly, Ferda felt something strange and wondered what it meant. Without caring about the cause, he revealed that he had used the distraction to gather his mana. He realized that one final strike would be enough to win the battle. At that, the dragon rose in fury and charged at Ferda. He then created a magic circle to defend himself. But to his surprise, Valdrova drove her own claws into her chest, injuring herself. Confused, Ferda wondered why she would do such a thing. Valdrova wanted to confirm something. Did Ferda's magic really require a dragon's heart? That was when Ferda understood she was trying to destroy her own heart. Desperate, Ferda screamed at her to stop. That heart was Ferda's only chance of reaching the ninth circle. Furious and desperate, Ferda shouted that he wouldn't let Valdrova destroy the heart. Consumed by rage, Ferda charged forward and attacked, calling her a cursed dragon. The blow landed directly, causing her to stagger. An explosion of light engulfed the entire scene. Amid the blinding light, Ferda shouted a single word, "No." In a panic, he demanded to know what had happened to the heart, screaming that this was madness. A golden glow reflected in his eyes. In disbelief, Ferda realized that the heart was still intact. Valdrova told him to simply take it. Unable to understand, all he could do was ask why. He said that he didn't understand. He asked why she would go so far when she could have simply killed him right there. Valdrova replied that she knew that, but she explained that Ferda had become unhappy because of her. The scene then shifted to a memory from Valdrova's past. For a long time, Valdrova hated herself. She hated the violent blood that ran through her veins. She carried an uncontrollable urge to destroy things for no reason, something she could never control. Her dragon eyes glowed, consumed by that ancient fury. A powerful magical force descended from the sky and an entire village was engulfed in flames. Amid the destruction, Valdrova walked alone while the villagers fled in terror, screaming. She believed that her existence had always terrified the people around her and that her death would solve everything. But wishing for happiness while she was alive had been a foolish dream, a dream that had only brought misery to so many others. A tear rolled down the dragon's face. Valdrova said that since everyone had become unhappy because of her, she hoped that at least Ferda could find happiness through her. She added that this would be the last thing she could do for him. A low groan escaped her. Ferda felt an increasing sense of unease, unable to understand where it was coming from. Furious, he accused Valdrova of trying to manipulate him until the very end. Trying not to be shaken, Ferda remembered why he had come this far. The ninth circle was within his reach. He raised the dragon's heart, the essence of a creature that had lived for countless ages. If he could absorb it, he thought, he would transcend the limits of humanity. Ferda absorbed the heart and screamed, on the verge of being reborn as a demigod. An explosion of energy consumed everything around him. Confused, he wondered what was happening. He was certain that he had absorbed the dragon's heart, but he felt as though he had fallen into an endless abyss, wondering if this was the effect of the heart he had consumed. Then he realized it. Standing before Valdrova, he was experiencing an overwhelming emotion that belonged to her. Suddenly, he fell to his knees. Shocked, Ferda gasped. He had just seen everything. Before him was a deep and ancient despair far greater than his own. And yet it was a loneliness that had tried to embrace the world until the very end. Ferda realized that his own rage, the rage that had brought that life to an end, was insignificant compared to this. In shock, he wondered what he had done. Confused, he questioned himself about what he had truly wanted so desperately, to become a great mage, revenge, to become a demigod. A memory took over his mind. As a child, Ferda used to draw alone in silence. Suddenly, he raised his frightened eyes and shook his head in denial. The drawing revealed the truth. All he had ever wanted was to start a simple family and live in peace. Back in reality, Ferda stared at the remnants of Valdrova as they dissolved before him. He whispered her name. He wondered if she had carried the same desire as he did. With no answer, Ferda murmured that in the end, none of it had made any sense. He remembered that Valdrova was already dead by his own hands. He wondered what the point of continuing was now. Tears streamed down Ferda's blood-stained eyes. Then he remembered something, the only spell a ninth circle mage could cast, the wish. Kneeling at the center of the magic circle, Ferda began to cast it. Even so, part of him insisted that there was no point in doing it. Suddenly, a voice whispered his name. Then someone exclaimed in disbelief, "Ferda." Surprised, he raised his eyes, unable to understand what was happening. Confused, he wondered where he was. Ferda noticed his father standing before him, scolding him for being distracted while he was speaking. His father's name was Irembolt Resnova. Ferda was certain that this man had become crippled and died. Intrigued, he wondered if this was the same day as before. Irembolt declared that Ferda's engagement to Grand Duchess Valdrova had been decided. He wanted to confirm whether Ferda understood what that meant. Irembolt warned that if Ferda refused the engagement, the entire family would meet their maker sooner than expected. Ferda stood up, certain of one thing, he had truly returned. Ferda replied that he understood. He swore to himself that this time he would not run away from his engagement to Valdrova. With his hand over his chest, he declared that he would formally accept the engagement. Upon hearing the news, the second son, Huron Resnova, was incredulous, asking if that bastard had really agreed to marry the Grand Duchess. Huron wondered if he had heard correctly, saying that Ferda might desperately cling to life, but he wasn't the kind of person who would willingly walk into his own grave without fear. He wanted to know what Ferda was doing now. A servant replied that Ferda had not left yet, but had dismissed the servants and locked himself in his room. Huron smiled, saying there was still time for a conversation between brothers. He suggested they go see what kind of face Ferda was making. Huron barged into the room, calling Ferda a bastard and asking why he still hadn't left. Surprised, Huron's eyes widened. He was certain he would find Ferda crying and begging not to go, but to his surprise, Ferda was preparing by himself. Already dressed, Ferda questioned whether it was appropriate to enter someone's room without even knocking. Ferda explained that he had dismissed the servants himself. From now on, Huron would have to get used to doing everything on his own since he would no longer have anyone to help him. Seeing Ferda standing before him, Huron found his attitude strange, unable to recognize the brother he knew. He asked if Ferda understood what it meant to have his engagement finalized. Ferda assumed that it was an order to leave the family. Huron laughed and corrected him, saying that the engagement would lead to Ferda's death. He asked if Ferda knew why the position of Grand Duchess Valdrova's fiancé had remained vacant for so long. Seriously, Ferda replied that he knew very well. In the past, Valdrova's first fiancé had been the Empire's third prince. He was a perfect man, brilliant, strikingly handsome, and completely trusted by the people. He gave up his claim to the throne to claim the title of fiancé to the tyrant dragon. One day, he set out to meet her for the engagement, smiling and full of hope. Shortly afterward, he was brutally beaten. Back in the present, Huron pointed a finger at Ferda, asking if he really thought he could succeed where even the third prince had failed. Waving his hand, he added mockingly, "Who would try to stop an idiot willing to walk straight into a dragon's mouth of his own accord?" Changing his tone, he warned Ferda not to even think about disobeying the family's orders and running away. He threatened that if he did, it would not be Valdrova who killed him, he would cut Ferda's head off himself. Ferda called him brother and shot back, saying that Huron should worry about controlling himself since everyone knew about the lustful looks he gave his older brother's wife. Shocked, Huron shouted, "What?" Furious, he lunged at Ferda but was restrained by a servant. Calmly, Ferda told him to control himself, even though he wanted to hit him. Smiling, he added that unlike when he was a child, it would be a problem if his face got scratched now. Ferda declared that he was leaving. The road to the dragon's lair was a long one. He headed toward the carriage that was already waiting for him at the gate. Moved with emotion, the butler said that it had been an honor to serve Ferda all this time as his young master. That caught the boy's attention. He thought to himself that those were nothing but empty words. Someone who truly cared about him would never have tampered with his food. Ever since he was a child, he had believed that he was constantly sick simply because he was weak. The truth was different. The butler had been poisoning his food. Only later did he realize that even the servants had never been on his side. As he remembered those days, he felt a deep hatred, enough to make him want to kill the man with his own hands. This time, however, Ferda chose a different path. Coldly, he mocked him, saying that the butler must have worked very hard taking such good care of him for so long. Completely confused, the man could only stammer nervously. Before leaving, Ferda asked them to take good care of the Resnova family in his absence. Once inside the carriage, he reflected that perhaps his heart was at peace precisely because he had already taken his revenge once. As they traveled between the trees, he felt his anger and desire for revenge disappear completely. An old memory returned to his mind. He remembered that the magic he had used back then was like a drug, intoxicating at first. As his limit of power increased, it became impossible to control, a true addiction. Lost in madness, everything felt stimulating and exhilarating to him. It was this addiction that led him to covet the dragon's heart. Back in the present, he no longer wanted to live that way. With his eyes closed, he let out a sigh. That peace he had not felt in so long was not unpleasant at all. Ferda wondered, intrigued, whether this meant that this time he would never awaken as a mage. A little while later, the carriage continued along the road, and the servants announced that they had arrived. A sign warned that from that point onward, the territory of the Grand Duchess began, and entry was strictly prohibited. Alone, Ferda waited while sitting on his own chest. Irritated, he remembered that the coachman had fled in terror as soon as he mentioned the possibility of a dragon appearing. He admitted that it was nice not to have anyone watching over him now, but if some wild beast appeared there, it would be a problem. He concluded that he would have to learn magic to survive. Something caught his attention among the trees. Seeing a figure approaching, he realized that she had arrived. A maid approached and introduced herself as Lurian, a servant of Grand Duchess Valdrova. Lurian asked if he was Lord Ferda Resnova. He confirmed that he was. She told him that she would escort him to the castle and indicated the path they should take. It was said that the Arkan Empire was capable of conquering anything. Its citizens lived intoxicated by that strength, but in reality that power was far from perfect. That territory was known as the Land of Demons, filled with monsters. It was a calamity that humans could never overcome on their own. That was when someone stopped the creature's advance and took control of the front line. That person was none other than the Crimson Dragon, Valdrova. Intrigued, Ferda thought it was unfair that despite single-handedly establishing the only line of defense in that territory, she was still called an evil dragon. Considering everything she had accomplished, he thought her reputation was undeservedly terrible. They said that she was secretly raising an army of monsters. But in the presence of a true dragon, not even those creatures dared make a sound. Meanwhile, beasts were lurking around Ferda, but they were soon struck head-on. Calmly, Lurian said that there was nothing to worry about. Lurian explained that as long as he stayed by her side, those creatures would not dare attack. Ferda thanked her. Impatiently, he asked how much longer they had to walk. Lurian replied that it would take 2 hours. Curious, Ferda wanted to know how she had reached him so quickly the first time. Lurian revealed that if she flew by herself, the journey would take only 10 seconds. He remarked that, as he had already suspected, she was not an ordinary maid. Lurian was actually a subordinate who had inherited dragon blood, a true dragonkin. She possessed innate strength and magic, along with hidden horns and a tail. She was an exceptionally high-ranking dragonkin, far above the others of her kind. Planting her staff into the ground, Ferda suggested that they could fly to the lair this time as well. Lurian asked if that would mean carrying him in her arms. Ferda insisted that it would not be a problem when it came to flying, he could handle it just fine. Lurian immediately refused. She said she simply did not want to. They continued walking for quite some time. Resigned, Ferda concluded that there was nothing he could do since she did not want to. He considered suggesting a break since they had already been walking for quite a while. Lurian, however, insisted that they hurry. Her mistress was already waiting for them. Ferda smiled awkwardly. Getting married was not an easy task, he thought. Eventually, they arrived at the castle, and Lurian announced to the Grand Duchess that her fiancé had arrived. Standing before the entrance, Ferda felt an overwhelming pressure coming from inside. Intrigued, he wondered whether a dragon's aura alone could really be this intense. Lurian warned him that she would receive the message on his behalf. He was not allowed to approach without permission. He would hear Valdrova's words only through her. Surprised, Ferda asked if he could not speak directly to the Grand Duchess. Through Lurian, Valdrova's voice echoed, questioning whether someone like him truly had the right to present himself before her. Ferda replied that he understood and asked her to continue. A moment later, Lurian announced that she would relay a message from Grand Duchess Valdrova. Through her, Valdrova acknowledged Ferda's merit for coming there despite knowing about her atrocities. After all, he had been appointed as her fiancé by order of the Arkan Empire. Even so, she warned that she had no intention of being forced into an engagement. She ordered him to return the way he had come. Perplexed, Ferda wondered if, after traveling all that way as her fiancé, he was simply going to be sent home. He thought that if he were the Ferda of the past, he would have accepted her rejection without hesitation. But the Ferda standing there now was different. Their bond had begun with an order, yet he chose to remain there of his own free will. Ferda declared that he did not wish to return. He wanted to move forward with the engagement. Without giving in, Valdrova asked through Lurian whether she should not pass that message along. The maid nodded and simply said that she understood. Lurian then prepared a sack filled with gold coins. Speaking on behalf of the Grand Duchess, she said that Valdrova appreciated the determination that had brought Ferda there of his own accord. If returning home would cause him trouble, Valdrova would give him wealth. All he had to do was leave that place and start a new life somewhere else. Sitting on top of the pile of coins, with the dragon watching in the background, Ferda replied that he had no interest in power or wealth. Kneeling before Valdrova, he declared that his only interest was becoming engaged to her. Lurian sighed, holding back her irritation. With her fist clenched, she warned him seriously that she would waste no more time with words. Ferda had to leave immediately. Surprised, Ferda commented that it was an awfully short message coming from the Duchess. Lurian corrected him. It was not an order from Valdrova, but her own will as a servant. She warned him that if he did not leave, he would never see the sun rise again. Her claws began to glow, and a pair of horns emerged from behind her hair. Lurian completed her transformation and took an attacking stance. An overwhelming fear seized him. Was this the true dragon fear? Lurian declared that she knew exactly what kind of creatures mortals like him were, trash with no consideration for Valdrova, driven solely by power and ambition. Ferda then understood the reason behind the third prince's death. Lurian confirmed that he was right. In a flashback, the third prince was revealed holding a marriage contract, his mind consumed by the desire to use Valdrova for his own benefit. Lurian said she could not understand how he had believed that his intentions would go unnoticed. She could only call him shameless. An arrogant man who had no idea what he was dealing with. Back in the present, Lurian warned that, in her eyes, Ferda was no different, and she lunged at him. She accused him of trying to deceive her mistress, asking whether he also wanted to die like the third prince. Even while being strangled, Ferda smiled. Solemnly, he declared that he, Ferda Resnova, swore then and there without a single lie that he had not come to that place because anyone had forced him to, nor had he come seeking any kind of benefit. He remembered that in the end it had been Valdrova who had given her own heart to a selfish man like him. He promised that this time he would become her ally. He declared that he had come as the man who would become Valdrova's fiancé. Since they were destined to become husband and wife, he asked that from then on they be allowed to speak directly without needing an intermediary. Lurian's hand trembled with rage. She shouted that it was absolutely absurd and attacked him again. Silence fell over the area. Ferda lay collapsed before her. Lurian asked for a moment. Weakened, he simply agreed. Lurian prepared to report Ferda's words to Valdrova. Kneeling before Valdrova, she repeated what he had said, that he had come as the man who would become her fiancé. Lurian addressed Valdrova as the great sovereign among the 12 rulers, the very embodiment of absolute power. In disbelief, Valdrova asked if he had really gone that far. Curious, she said that she now wanted to know what kind of person he was. Valdrova asked Lurian what Ferda looked like when she saw him. Lurian replied that he was an extremely frail human, as if the journey to the castle alone could have killed him. Valdrova asked for more details. Mockingly, Lurian said that he was horrible to look at and joked that it would be better if they simply got rid of him. Valdrova called her by name suspiciously. Lurian backed down and admitted that in truth his face was quite handsome, the kind of face that must have made many women cry. Valdrova grumbled that this was not what she had asked. After a moment of silence, Lurian sighed and admitted that Ferda was at the very least unusual. She explained that as a dragonkin, frightening mortals was easy for her. But this time was different. Ferda had not felt the slightest bit of fear when she released her aura. Because of that, she believed that he would be capable of facing Valdrova directly without looking away. Valdrova said nothing. She simply watched. Then she commented that this was fortunate. She was intrigued, a human capable of meeting her gaze. She confessed that perhaps she could face him normally. Surprised, Lurian repeated the word normally. Valdrova confirmed that yes, normally, and Lurian was left speechless. A little while later, Lurian appeared before Ferda and announced that Valdrova had decided to proceed with the engagement. Ferda sprang to his feet in surprise. Lurian led Ferda through the castle corridors. She told him that she would take him to the guest room. Upon entering, Ferda thought that the place was better maintained than he had expected. Seeing how tidy everything was, he asked who took care of the room. Lurian replied that she did. It was her, the mistress's only servant. Intrigued, he wanted to know if there was really no one else besides her. Lurian simply called him a guest. Surprised, Ferda repeated guest, not fiancé. Lurian clarified that the ceremony had not even taken place yet. Until then, he was merely guest number one. Lurian's hostility toward humans was obvious. Ferda silently thought that she seemed more like a guard dog. Tired of the rivalry, he asked her to put that hostility aside. He asked when the engagement ceremony would take place. Lurian replied that it would happen in 1 month. She explained that only 3 people would participate, the mistress herself and the guest. The ceremony would be simple and held in secret inside the dragon's lair. Ferda simply said that he understood. He thought that 1 month should be enough time. Lurian watched him silently with her arms crossed. She warned him that the ceremony would not simply be handed to him. That same period would serve as his opportunity to prove his worth. Intrigued, Ferda asked what she meant. She explained that the partner of such a magnificent being needed to have a status worthy of the role. He had exactly 1 month starting from that moment to prove it. Exhausted, Ferda thought that even getting married would not be easy this time. Suspicious, he asked whether that requirement had come from the mistress herself. Lurian denied it. She said it was her own decision. He questioned whether a servant had the authority to make such a decision on her own. She replied that the mistress was far too gentle. Even if her lady allowed it to slide, Lurian would not be able to do the same. She then demanded that he prove he had potential despite that fragile body. She clenched her fist, ready to put him to the test. The scene shifted to a dark hall where other figures watched in silence. A warning echoed through the room. If Ferda failed this test, no matter how much he considered himself her fiancé, he would never be recognized as the Grand Duchess's consort. He simply sighed, already completely fed up. Ferda thought that his fiancé had certainly managed to keep someone loyal by her side. He acknowledges that despite disliking him, Lurian places her mistress above everything else and knows exactly what is required of a consort. An old memory resurfaces in his mind, the moment when he held the dragon's heart in his own hands. Ferda wonders why someone as loyal as Lurian never appeared during that final moment. Determined to prove his worth, he asks how far he would need to go. Would he have to become the emperor of the empire? Lurian answers that there is no need to go that far. All he needs is to reach a level where the other great beings can no longer look down on him. Ferda thinks it is easy for her to say that, considering she is asking for potential capable of surpassing an emperor. Even so, he accepts the challenge. Suspicious of his calm demeanor, Lurian asks why he is so relaxed. Annoyed, she snaps, does he think dragons are easy to deal with, or is he simply an idiot? Ferda replies that it is neither. He assures her there is nothing to worry about. Within a month, he will show enough potential to convince her. Alone, Lurian wonders where so much confidence could possibly come from in a human. At night in the castle tower, Ferda walks alone, repeating to himself that he needs to prove his potential. He admits that at the moment he has no skills whatsoever, but he remembers that mages are rare on this continent, and the experience of having reached the 9th circle is something only he possesses. Concentrating energy in the palm of his hand, he feels that if the sensations from before still remain within him, then this should be more than possible. He recalls the basic principles. For a mage, the first circle is the most important, the point that determines the nature of their mana circuits. There is the blue circle, formed through calm meditation, slower but stable and the path chosen by most mages. And then there is the red circle, born from turbulent emotions, capable of granting power quickly, but at the cost of consuming its user and potentially driving them insane. Ferda remembers that in his past he became a great mage through hatred alone. When he recalls Valdrova's fallen body, he thinks that if he followed the same path he had taken before, he would become powerful even faster. Ferda presses his lips together, his face tense. He promises himself that this time he will follow a different path firmly without wavering. A week passes. Sitting on the floor with his legs crossed, Ferda tries once again to form his magic circle. He concentrates energy in his hands and a blue sphere begins to form before him, but the energy dissipates. Another failure. He reflects that the time normally required to create a blue circle is at least 3 years. He thought that with the sensations he retained from before his regression, he would be able to do it faster, but he realizes that dealing with it is completely different from dealing with the red circle. Only 3 weeks remain. At his current pace, finishing in time will be difficult. Lurian enters carrying a tray and asks if he is preparing himself. Ferda confirms that he is. Even so, she notices that nothing seems to have changed. Ferda insists that if he keeps trying, he will eventually succeed. While eating, he admits to himself that he is making no progress and recognizes that he needs a different approach. Suddenly, a tremor shakes the area. Intrigued, Ferda asks what that vibration is. Lurian explains that the mistress is subjugating monsters. Curious, he wants to know more. Lurian tells him that Valdrova is single-handedly exterminating the creatures invading from the land of demons in the Far East. Ferda becomes thoughtful, imagining what that battle must look like. He declares that he wants to witness the battle with his own eyes. Lurian advises him not to go. Intrigued, Ferda asks why. She answers that no human mind would be capable of withstanding it. Mockingly, she adds that unless he wants to wet himself in embarrassment before their engagement ceremony, he would be better off not watching. Ferda simply remains silent. Determined, Ferda says no. He thinks that witnessing that battle is the duty of someone who's going to become her partner. He tells Lurian that he wants to see that battle with his own eyes. Lurian spreads her wings and carries him through the air, flying at high speed toward the location. She announces that they have arrived. The two land on the grass. Lurian lands gracefully. Ferda falls onto all fours, still feeling the impact of that speed. It was almost like teleportation, he thinks. Feeling nauseous, he mutters that he is going to be sick. Clapping her hands together, Lurian says that she is not the one he should be looking at. She tells him to stand up and look ahead. Ferda raises his eyes, forcing himself to focus. The two move toward the edge of a cliff with the wind whipping around them. Ferda's expression hardens. Perplexed, he wonders if that is where Valdrova is fighting. A gigantic mass writhes in the distance. An explosion of light erupts from the center of that mass. Valdrova emerges amid the flames, charging toward the enemies. Two other dragon-like creatures with purplish scales growl around her. With her claw, Valdrova grabs one of the monsters and raises her head, preparing a powerful attack. Then she unleashes a devastating breath of fire, consuming everything in front of her. Beside Ferda, Lurian watches the scene in silence. The dragon's roar echoes throughout the entire region. Below them, the area is completely destroyed by the attack. Witnessing it, Ferda's face contorts in shock. Collapsed on the ground, he thinks in astonishment that this was Valdrova's true power. The dragon's roar itself strikes him like a physical weight, knocking the breath out of him. Lurian asks if he understands now. It is absurd for a human to dare to join himself with a dragon. Pointing toward the explosion of light, Lurian reveals that this is the true form of the one who will become his partner. Turning her gaze toward Ferda, she thinks that, as expected, he is trembling, and that this is precisely why she warned him beforehand. She explains that within the blood of a crimson dragon dwells what humans call the essence of an evil dragon. According to her, it is a life of destruction, driven by a savage and murderous instinct. This nature is innate, regardless of one's character. She warns that his frail back would be broken every day and that determination alone would not be enough. Then she asks if he now understands what it means to become the partner of a dragon. She declares categorically that humans and dragons could never become one. In her thoughts, she hopes that this will finally make her mistress realize that her dream of being beside a human will never bear fruit. But when he raises his eyes, Ferda smiles and murmurs that it is simply magnificent. Lurian's eyes widen in disbelief when she sees him smiling like that. She questions how he can admire that instead of feeling terrified, completely confused by his reaction. Still shocked, Lurian can only conclude that he must be a crazy masochist. Night falls over the castle. Already lying in his room, Ferda thinks that he really did try to prepare himself for that. Even so, his entire body feels shattered. It was not only the dragon's fear, the dragon's roar struck him head-on as well. Outside, Lurian claps her hands, satisfied. Ferda thinks it is a miracle that his mind has returned intact. At his current pace, he calculates that he will lose an entire day without even coming close to opening a circle. Frustrated, he wonders why he wanted to watch that battle in the first place. The next day, he walks alone through an open field, trying to reflect on what he saw. Sitting on a hill at sunset, he admits that it was absolutely terrifying. Even so, he recognizes that he could not look away. Little by little, he understands. Valdrova hides her true form in the far eastern reaches of the continent. Every monster she crushes is simply to protect what she loves. To Ferda, she walks like a noble red knight, willingly choosing the most difficult path. Still impressed, he repeats to himself that it was simply magnificent. Suddenly, he thinks, what if he and her? Before he can finish the thought, he feels something strange forming inside him. He recognizes the sensation immediately, the red circle. He realizes that this is not the kind of mana he needs and that he cannot repeat what he did in the past. Determined, he decides to reject that power. Before him, the image of the Red Knight appears once again. Ferda wonders what it is. He whispers her name, Valdrova. He notices something strange. The more he recalls her battle, the clearer his mana circuits become. Intrigued, he realizes that this emotion is neither anger nor a desire for revenge. Without knowing what to call it, he wonders what kind of feeling it is. Focused on the red water, Ferda finds the sensation strange, too vague as if it could dissipate if he did not capture it immediately. He focuses all his attention on that emotion, compressing it and spinning it with force. The energy condenses around him until it takes the shape of a singular circle. The magic circle shines above his palm. This time I thought it would be different. Determined, he swears that he will not allow the same mistakes to happen again. Suddenly, Lurian appears, shocked, asking if he really opened his circuits overnight. Ferda remarks that she has already noticed her eyes really do not lie. Still incredulous, she insists, "You could barely stand yesterday. I want to know how you managed to open your circuits overnight, when that should have been impossible." Ferda simply replies that he did it because he is not a normal person. Skeptical, Lurian simply says, "Oh, is that so?" He asks what she thinks now. She admits that he meets the qualification standard. In his thoughts, however, Ferda recognizes that he still has a long way to go. He then asks if there is somewhere nearby where he can practice magic. Shortly afterward, training targets are set up in the field. Using her own broom, Lurian finishes preparing the area. She presents the results. She built the training ground exactly as he requested. Impressed, Ferda thinks that, as expected of Valdrova's only servant, she managed to set everything up by herself in half a day. Clapping his hands, he praises her work. Curious, Lurian asks why he requested only targets instead of expensive magical tools, and what exactly he intends to practice. Ferda explains that he wants to learn how to control mana more efficiently. Without control, he would simply be wasting his power. Confused, she questions why he thinks that way. It's something natural, like it is for dragons. In disbelief, she says that it sounds as though he is saying he needs training just to breathe. Ferda comments that if other dragon hatchlings heard that, they would call her comment primitive. He asks whether in her eyes his effort also seems primitive. Sleepily, Lurian simply retorts that she is also a dragon hatchling. Ferda falls silent, unable to respond. In his thoughts, he wonders how someone born talented could possibly understand human effort. Shortly afterward, Lurian asks if she can watch his training. Ferda agrees, warning her that in her eyes it will probably look like nothing more than a breathing exercise. He heads alone toward the training ground. He recalls the basic principle. The foundation of mana control is stability. That is the method of the blue circle, but his circle is red. Therefore, he needs to stir his own emotions while keeping them under control at the same time. He concludes that only by overcoming this contradiction can his power finally be unlocked. He remembers that in the past, it took him an entire year just to draw mana from that violent current, and another entire year to condense it into a sphere, recreating through blood, sweat, and effort the same mana bullet he had already mastered before. This time, the process takes only 2 minutes. A red sphere forms at Ferda's fingertip without the slightest sign of effort. Shocked, Lurian thinks, a mana sphere without even breaking a sweat. Did he really manage to control his own mana on his very first training session? 3 spheres appear around his hand. Ferda aims at the targets in the distance. The spheres shoot forward at high speed and explode upon striking the targets head-on. Satisfied, he names the technique Mana Shot. Standing upright with his hand still releasing sparks, Ferda simply concludes, as he expected, that was not enough to kill him. Behind him, Lurian watches in silence, her expression stern, visibly finding his progress strange. Later, back at the lair, Lurian stands before Valdrova to tell her how things went with Lord Ferda. Valdrova receives the news with approval. Very good, Luri. So he awakened as a mage shortly after arriving here. Even so, she admits that she cannot say how impressive that really is. Since Lurian knows the outside world better, she asks what impression the man made on her. Lurian replies that from the very beginning he was perfect, without making a single mistake, and that is precisely what makes him suspicious and dangerous. Curious, Valdrova asks why. Lurian explains that there is no way a human could reach that level without making a single mistake. He must be hiding something. Without hesitation, she came up with a theory. It could only be the work of a pervert who enjoyed suffering. Valdrova chuckled softly, finding it amusing. She remarked that for Luri to recognize a human to such an impressive extent, he must indeed be quite something. Reluctantly, Lurian admitted that yes, that was the case. Valdrova told her not to worry, reminding her that Ferda himself had declared that he had come there with pure intentions. She decided to trust him. Alone with her thoughts, Lurian reflected that her lady had already suffered far too much at the hands of humans. Now that she had finally opened her heart, Lurian had to make sure it would not happen again. If only she could probe that man's true intentions. That was when an idea occurred to her. Excited, Lurian asked Valdrova if, taking advantage of the opportunity, she would consider entrusting that to him. Intrigued, Valdrova asked what she meant by that. Sometime later, a page solemnly announced the arrival of Lord Ferda Risnova. At the association's headquarters, dozens of lords gathered around a large round table, facing the empty chair at the head, all of them summoned by Grand Duchess Valdrova herself, president of the Eastern Frontier. Impatient, one of them grumbled that with monsters capable of attacking at any moment, he couldn't understand who had the time for a meeting at a time like this. Beside him, another lord asked if he hadn't heard. Apparently, the fiancé recently chosen by the Grand Duchess was coming. A murmur of shock swept across the entire table. A fiancé. One of the bulkier lords slammed his hand against the table in disbelief. That couldn't be true. Was there really some fool out there who had mistaken the order for the Grand Duchess to become engaged with an actual marriage proposal? Beside him, a bearded man confirmed it. Yes, exactly. From what he had heard, it was the third young master of the Risnova family, a boy who had barely come of age. Comments filled the hall, dripping with mockery. An 18-year-old boy playing king, hiding behind the Grand Duchess. King, my foot. They said he was a defective product, incapable of even properly wielding a sword. Coming from the Risnovas, the very imperial guardian knights, and yet he was supposedly worse than a common soldier. A lord whose face was hidden in the shadows, his fingers interlaced on the table, muttered that there was no point in worrying. How long would that boy last anyway? Finally, Count Lord Ulver Concilius closed his eyes and declared that the fiancé would be torn apart by the Grand Duchess herself sooner or later. Around the table, voices agreed in murmurs. It was true, exactly. Then a solemn announcement rang through the hall. Lord Ferda Resnova was arriving. The doors opened, flooding the corridor with light. Ferda stepped across the threshold with firm strides, Lurian following a few steps behind him. The scene shifted back in time to several hours earlier. Inside one of the castle's chambers, Ferda asked whether he really had to go now. Luri replied that it was something he would have to do sooner or later anyway. She then asked if he knew why her lady was called Grand Duchess Valdrova. He confirmed that he did. Of course he did. The old pages of that grimoire contained the account of the incarnation of darkness, the root of evil that had helped give rise to the Demon King himself, the Black Dragon Godwin. The one who had ended that dragon's life was Valdrova. Lurian confirmed that he was correct. For that achievement, the Empire had granted her the title of Grand Duchess along with the territory she ruled today. Now, Valdrova's most important task was the subjugation of monsters. Therefore, as the man who would become her husband, Ferda would be responsible for managing the territories and lords of the eastern frontier on her behalf. In short, his lady handled external affairs while he would handle internal affairs. Ferda considered that for a moment, so he would be the lady of the house. A spark of excitement crossed his mind. Was she already letting him have a taste of power? But then a colder thought took over. It seemed she still didn't completely trust him. This wasn't really a gift, it was a test. Even so, he accepted. Very well, he would meet with the lords. Back in the present, Ferda walked toward the center of the hall, his back to the stained glass windows, facing the entire table of lords who only minutes earlier had been secretly mocking him. It was a pleasure meeting you all. I am the man who will soon become Grand Duchess Valdrova's husband. He paused, then continued. Before we begin our discussion, I have a question. How would you like me to address you? The mocking murmurs around the table gave way to poorly concealed surprise. He already seemed formidable from his very first greeting. One lord cleared his throat uneasily, while another chuckled quietly pleased. Once he opened his mouth again, the hierarchy among them would be settled right there. Count Lord Ulvera Concilius spoke up. They were lords who lived under the Grand Duchess's light. Naturally, they owed respect to the man who would become her husband. However, the lords gathered there had already been loyal to the Empire since before Ferda had even been born. From the other side of the table, someone added, "Therefore, wouldn't it be only fair for the consort to show us the courtesy we are due?" Voices agreed in the background. Oh, indeed. Ferda stared across the entire table, his hands clasped behind his back. Is that your final answer? Should I treat you with respect or should I speak down to you? He stared at the group with a serious expression. Just answer that question. Ulvera smiled calmly. Of course it is only right for the consort to speak down to us. Ferda nodded. Understood, that helps a lot. He turned his attention back to everyone. As you already know, even after I become the consort, very little will change directly. Your territories will remain in your hands and continue to be administered as they always have been, whether you govern your people benevolently or exploit them. A younger lord with reddish-brown hair slammed his fist against the table and shouted, "Exploit them? Are you implying that we suck our own people dry?" An awkward silence fell over the hall. Even he seemed to realize far too late that he had gone much further than he intended. Ferda raised a hand, his tone calm. "I meant no offense, it was simply a slip of the tongue." The lord glared at him contemptuously, his eyes narrowed. "Now I understand why your own family abandoned you." He continued, his voice dripping with scorn. "Abandoned by a family of knights and now you're sniffing around trying to become a mage. You would do well to learn how to treat your superiors with more respect, First Circle Mage. You're only still standing there because of your title as the Grand Duchess's fiancé. Does that make you better than me, a Fourth Circle Mage?" Ferda muttered almost to himself. "Fourth Circle, huh, that's average." The lord's eyes trembled with fury. "What did you just say?" A Fourth Circle Mage was treated with honor wherever he went. The hierarchy among mages was determined solely by ability. Completely enraged, the lord shouted, "Average, and a mere First Circle Mage dares insult me. I'll teach you some manners." Energy began gathering around his hand, ready to be unleashed at Ferda. Ferda calmly raised his hand, stopping him before things could go any further. "In that case, I have a proposition you might like. As a chance to test the abilities of a mere First Circle Mage, how about a duel between the two of us?" News of the duel between a First Circle Mage and a Fourth Circle Mage quickly spread throughout the castle. Gathered in the courtyard stands, two lords whispered behind their hands, barely suppressing their laughter. Isn't the outcome obvious? If he takes this opportunity to put that boy in his place, everything will be easier afterward. A third, more cautious lord hesitated. Do you think Thessalos will go easy on Ferda? A little farther away from the spectators, Lurian watched everything in silence. At the center of the arena, Ferda and the reddish-brown-haired lord stood facing each other at opposite ends of the stone circle, surrounded by the other lords. Ferda was the first to break the silence. "What magic are you planning to use?" Thessalos twisted his face in annoyance. "How rude, asking someone to reveal their hand right at the start of a duel, or are you already afraid? You can give up right now if you'd rather and hear the rest afterward." Raising his arms, he announced, "I'll be using Fourth Circle magic, Magical Explosion." An uproar swept through the spectators. Wasn't magical explosion a spell designed purely for destruction? If he were hit by that, wouldn't he be killed instantly? Ferda watched the scene with a calm expression. Understood, then I'll tell you something as well. The only magic I know how to use is mana shot. Thessalos raised an eyebrow sarcastically. Mana shot, do you really think you can win with such a basic spell? Silently, Ferda thought that he didn't believe he would lose. Aloud, he merely commented, well, as it happens, I know quite a few things. That alone was enough to infuriate Thessalos. Arrogant bastard. Mana was already crackling between his fingers. A magic circle began forming in front of him, unstable, its colors blending together with almost violent intensity. Without the slightest hesitation, he shouted, I'll make you disappear without leaving a single trace. With his back turned to the others, Ferda watched carefully, such dense killing intent. He was deliberately increasing the spell's power. To manipulate magic through such intense emotion, he must possess a red magic circle as well. What a shame, Ferda thought, almost pityingly. The next instant, Thessalos' eyes widened, confusion spreading across his face. What? Ferda's calm voice cut through the air. The outcome of this duel has already been decided. 4 red spheres condensed around his hand, glowing brightly, the same technique he had named weeks earlier, now launched with all the power he could muster. The only thing the Lord could do was shout for a magical defense. Amid the swirling light, Thessalos found himself engulfed by the shockwave, his arms raised, panic covering his face. But the attack wasn't coming toward him. Ferda wasn't aiming at him, he was aiming at the magic circle. In an instant, the unstable magic circle Thessalos had been forming shattered, consumed by a blinding light that swept across the entire arena. He destroyed the magic circle. Thessalos shouted in disbelief, feeling his own spell dissolve beneath his hands. Is this really the level of a first circle mate? With his trembling hand raised above his head, his face drenched in sweat, Thessalos admitted, a technique capable of destroying magic circles. Even I can't do something like that. Supporting himself on his hands and breathing heavily, he repeated quietly, I can't believe it. He had lost. Ferda approached with calm steps and stopped in front of him. Do you surrender? A moment of silence passed before Thessalos finally managed to answer, I want to become stronger. He bowed completely before Ferda, his forehead almost touching the ground. I admit defeat. If it means I can become stronger, there is nothing I wouldn't be willing to do. In the stands, murmurs spread in disbelief. Thessalos, a 4th circle mage, lost to a 1st circle mage. Even after witnessing it with their own eyes, it was still difficult to believe. Wiping the sweat from his face, a bald lord whispered, could a dragonkin have secretly interfered without anyone noticing? Beside him, Lurian replied with an impassive expression. If you still can't believe what you saw with your own eyes, perhaps it would be better to tear those useless eyes out. The lord swallowed hard and the comment died right there. Back in the center of the arena, Thessalos held Ferda's hand with both of his own, still kneeling, his eyes shining with admiration. I never imagined I would meet someone of your caliber. The world really is vast. Ferda replied that his magic had been exceptional as well. If you had been just a little faster, I might have been the one in danger. He added, seeing the strength of the eastern territories up close, I feel reassured. Still kneeling, Thessalos laughed awkwardly. Haha, for someone to recognize me like that, perhaps being demoted from the capital wasn't entirely a bad thing after all. The honor is mine for having met the consort. Still kneeling with a crooked smile on his lips, he replied, my name is Thessalos Vulture. Ferda looked at the kneeling man before him and declared, I remember you. Thessalos asked how Ferda knew him. Ferda simply said, you were my benefactor. Confused, Thessalos denied ever having done anything for him. Without hesitation, Ferda raised his finger to Thessalos' forehead and fired a mana shot. The attack struck him directly, killing the man instantly. The nobles around them gasped, shocked by the scene. Ferda declared that he could not let him live because doing so would only bring despair to his fiancée. He walked away, leaving Thessalos' body behind. Word quickly spread among those present. Ferda had killed a noble. Someone commented that the duel had already ended, but Ferda killed him before anyone could stop him. They said that it was clearly murder. Even so, no one dared to stand against him. With blood splattered across his face, Ferda asked why everyone was so tense, wondering if it was because of Thessalos. He said they did not need to worry since Thessalos was a man who deserved to die. Leaving him alive would only make the Grand Duchess unhappy. Intrigued, another noble asked how Thessalos' death could possibly have anything to do with the Grand Duchess's happiness, since this seemed to be the consort's first meeting with them and with Thessalos himself. Ferda replied that Grand Duchess Valdrova desired the happiness of humans. He called her a merciful Grand Duchess who fought for humanity despite being trapped in the body of a dragon. He claimed that Thessalos had acted against her wishes. The elder began to question him but was interrupted. Ferda continued, saying that the crime would happen in the distant future, which made it difficult to prove right then and there. Astounded, the elder could only mutter that it was absurd. The nobles whispered among themselves, saying that Ferda claimed to have killed a lord for something that had not even happened yet, calling him a complete lunatic. With his face still stained with blood, Ferda warned them that he did not care in the slightest what the others thought. A short while later, he was already traveling in a carriage. Inside the vehicle, Ferda held his head, feeling sick, while the maid watched him from beside him. He complained that his head was spinning. Recalling the duel, he thought that he had never expected to find Thessalos' vulture there, and that using mana shot had drained all of his mana. Back in reality, he grumbled that the carriage's rocking was only making his nausea worse, and found himself missing mana-powered cars, even though he knew they had not even been invented yet. Luri reacted with amazement, teasing Ferda by saying that killing one of the Grand Duchess's most loyal subjects at their very first meeting would be a major obstacle to the engagement. Surprised, Ferda repeated the expression, asking if she was talking about Thessalos. She confirmed it. As unbelievable as it might seem, Thessalos was one of the lords loyal to the Grand Duchess. Ferda remarked that this was troublesome and asked whether Thessalos was an honorable man. She replied that he was moderately honorable and moderately corrupt, and that in the Far East that level of mediocrity was already considered the best. She added that the other lords only cared about lining their own pockets, even though they were stationed on the front lines where they could face death at any moment. Even so, Ferda concluded that the engagement should proceed as planned since his reason for killing Thessalos had been justified. Thoughtfully, he tried to remember the details. If his memory was correct, Thessalos should still be committing a serious crime, even at that very moment. Ferda and the maid arrived at the Vulture family castle. The butler greeted them with a bow, saying that it was an honor to receive guests from the Grand Duchess's castle. Ferda asked for the lord of the house. The butler regretfully informed him that the master was absent. Without beating around the bush, Ferda replied that he was dead and that the butler did not need to worry about it. Confused, the butler could only ask what he meant. Ferda handed him a bag and asked him to hang it somewhere visible beside the castle gate. As he took it, the butler was startled, unable to understand what was inside. When he opened it, he recognized his master's head and stammered in shock. Inside Thessalos' room, the maid commented that the place looked abandoned, as though they were there to rob an empty house. She warned Ferda that since he had exposed the head of a loyal subject, it would be better to find evidence proving that he had actually been a corrupt lord. Ferda retorted, asking whether she herself had not helped him kill him. With her eyes gleaming, the maid threatened to say that she was still considering calling off the engagement and asked whether she should retrieve the head. Ignoring her provocation, Ferda announced that he had found a hidden door beneath the bed. He felt along the surface, searching for a mechanism to open it. When he failed, he asked the maid to step back. She raised her fist and struck the floor, forcing it open. As soon as the passage was revealed, she invited Ferda to enter. They then descended a frightening staircase. Bothered by the smell, Ferda covered his nose, commenting that it was no wonder the stench of blood was spreading throughout the place. The maid did the same, disgusted. Before them was a secret laboratory filled with piles of human and monster corpses. Those traces of desecration and experiments on monsters could only belong to one kind of person, the followers of the demon, those who abandoned their humanity in exchange for demonic power. Among them, Thessalos' vulture was a dark mage, a necromancer. Examining one of the bodies, Ferda recognized the corpse of a soldier from the territory. Luri added that he had connected the dead soldier's organs to those of a monster. The maid commented that in the end, humans really were unreliable, and that if Thessalos truly was a follower of the demon, that crime alone was more than enough to justify his death, more than making up for the murder of a noble. She wanted to know how Ferda had known about the hidden laboratory. Among the papers, Ferda announced that he had found something. It was Thessalos' unnamed work, the infinite mana cultivation method. A memory came rushing back to Ferda. In a scene from the past, Thessalos asked Ferda if he knew what it was, explaining that monsters produced mana constantly. He went on to say, however, that it was murky, low-quality mana, useless for any purpose. Thessalos then wondered what would happen if they could recreate a monster's mana production and continuously extract pure mana. Excited, he declared that it would become an infinite source of magical power, and that if he completed the method, he would be able to surpass the limits of the magic circles. Ferda of the past asked what Thessalos intended to do with the method, calling the discovery remarkable. Euphoric, Thessalos replied that he would use the army of undead he had created to crush the nobles who had looked down on him, bringing destruction all the way to the territory of the evil dragon itself. Still laughing, he remarked that perhaps he would soon be able to aim for the position of Grand Mage. The Ferda of the past simply replied that he understood. Then he murmured that it would be useful for his revenge. A thank you was heard, the final gesture from Ferda before taking what he needed from Thessalos. Back in the present, Ferda held the same papers, reflecting that in the end the method had fallen into his hands once again. He recognized it as the unnamed method that, in his previous life, had allowed him to reach the 8th circle faster than any other mage. If he studied it, he could reach the 8th circle several times faster. Lurian teased him, saying that seeing him covet something like that made her think Ferda might be just as human as anyone else. Since the research was complete and the researcher was dead, no one would ever know if he stole it. Finally, she remarked that this was the opportunity every human desired to become stronger than everyone else, and congratulated him. Ferda interrupted her, replying simply, "No." He ordered them to destroy everything in the laboratory. Surprised, the maid questioned whether he was serious, asking whether, as a mage, he did not feel at least some temptation when faced with such knowledge. Ferda acknowledged that the research truly had the potential to revolutionize magic, but asked what good that would do. Remembering his own past, he thought that if he ever allowed himself to be seduced by the temptation of such great power and ended up making the Grand Duchess sad again, it would be better to tear it out by the roots right now. He asked the maid whether she was willing to burn the material. She hesitated for a moment, then replied that it was not a difficult request for her. The book caught fire in her hands, surrounded by blue flames, and an explosion consumed the area. The narration revealed that every spell carries traces of the emotions of the person who casts it, and that the caster's essence becomes stained by that magic. Since Thessalos hated the Empire, his magic also carried hatred, and that same hatred gradually consumed him from within. Further reflected that Thessalos also possessed a red circle, and that his hatred and inferiority complex were just as strong as Ferda's had been in his previous life. He thought that the two of them shared the same anger, and that if he continued using that magic, he would once again be consumed by emotions he would be unable to endure. That was why he needed to discard it. He remembered his former self, forced to hate simply in order to survive. Surrounded by the flames, Ferda commented that it really did burn well. The maid watched in disbelief, calling him an unpredictable psychopath and on top of that a masochist. She thought to herself that he was a human she would not want to keep near her lady, but nevertheless suggested that they leave that moldy place as soon as possible. It would be rude to show up smelling of blood at the engagement ceremony with her lady. Finally, the day of the engagement ceremony had arrived. The scene shifted to Grand Duchess Valdrova's castle on the day appointed for the engagement. As they walked through the corridors, Lurian asked whether Ferda had finished writing his vows for the engagement ceremony. He replied that he had, of course. Holding the paper, he commented that having both of them perform the ceremony with written vows was quite a romantic gesture on the Grand Duchess's part. The maid reacted tensely, saying that romantic was a generous way of describing it, since, despite being the face of power, she was holding her own engagement ceremony in a place worse than a stable. She was genuinely worried about her lady's dignity. Ferda observed that even though she was not pleased with the engagement, she still wanted Valdrova to be happy, a contradiction that seemed to weigh heavily on her. Luri questioned why he was looking at her like that, warning him not to wrinkle the ceremonial outfit she had worked so hard to iron. Ferda simply remained silent, thinking that if taking her anger out on him helped, then fine. Ferda commented that things had been quiet since the last summons and asked about the state of the Grand Duchess's territory. He observed that the lords did not seem at all prepared to fight on the front lines. The maid confirmed that he had seen correctly. She explained that when the lords were granted autonomy, things had been acceptable at first, but without anyone supervising them, they all began caring only about lining their own pockets. They suppressed the people's discontent through military force, and no one knew when a major rebellion might erupt. Ferda considered the situation serious and asked whether the problem would not be resolved if the Grand Duchess herself intervened. The maid replied that a single word from her would be enough for everyone to prostrate themselves immediately. Ferda then wanted to know why she did not intervene. The maid simply said that he would understand soon. A short while later, they arrived before an enormous gate and the maid asked Lord Ferda to sit down and wait. A voice from the other side announced that the engagement ceremony would begin. Alone before the enormous flaming gate, Ferda waited. Tense, he gripped the fabric of his clothes, feeling the air escaping through the gaps in the door as though it were crushing his entire body. The door opened, revealing Valdrova, and Ferda anxiously wondered whether someone like him truly had the right to face Valdrova. Already inside, before the Queen of Dragons, Lurian announced that on this day the mortal and the immortal would become one. Luri raised a small vessel, declaring that they would be joined by a golden thread that neither the authority of the heavens nor the storms of time could sever. The mortal would abandon the unknown and wash away his fear, becoming one with the immortal. Ferda drank the contents of the bowl. As he tasted it, he realized that it was not ordinary wine. The overwhelming presence of the dragon was beginning to disappear little by little. The voice continued, saying that the immortal would erase the futility of the endless flow, becoming one with the mortal. A claw appeared and grabbed the bowl. Suddenly, it overturned, spilling everything. Surprised, Ferda and Luri looked at each other, and the voice announced that they would restart the ritual from the beginning. A short while later, they tried again. Confused, Ferda asked what was happening. Already visibly drunk, he wondered how many times it had been his turn to drink, admitting that it was the first time he had drunk in this life and that he had already had too much. Luri watched him with concern, saying that this was becoming dangerous as Ferda staggered. Angrily, she clenched her teeth. She asked for a moment and stepped away, leaving Ferda alone, dizzy and hunched over the table. From the other side, she shouted, asking her lady what she thought she was doing. She confronted Valdrova, reminding her that she herself had insisted on marrying a mortal, and questioned what her loyal servant Luri was supposed to do in that situation. She shouted that she had already endured enough. What was the point of hiding there with her own fiancé sitting right in front of her, and what did that make of the fiancé who was waiting outside? Finally, she demanded that Valdrova come out proudly to greet her fiancé, warning that if she spilled the engagement wine one more time, she would not let it slide. By the end, Ferda was already lying on the floor, exhausted from the alcohol, while Luri left the Great Queen's Hall. Ferda asked whether Luri had heard that. She confirmed it, saying that it had been an impressive roar worthy of a dragon's breath. She added that it was necessary to ensure that the ceremony proceeded without problems, revealing that her lady suffered from social anxiety. Surprised, Ferda repeated the expression, questioning whether he had heard correctly. Luri explained that Lady Valdrova was reluctant to deal with humans and that she therefore only left her lair when she went out to hunt monsters. In disbelief, Ferda wondered Valdrova her. Still confused, he wanted to know how they were supposed to continue the ceremony. A crack split the air and the chains holding the enormous gate broke apart. Before him appeared a figure covered in imposing armor. The figure knelt before the small table prepared for the ritual. He remarked that she must be hiding her face since that thing was enormous. Ferda thought to himself that people said a dragon's transformed form was wonderfully beautiful, but this looked more like someone preparing to march into battle. The armored figure announced that they would resume the engagement ceremony. The ritual resumed. The mortal would abandon the unknown and wash away his fear, becoming one. The immortal would erase the futility of the endless flow, becoming one. Wine was poured into the bowl. For a moment, the figure's face became visible beneath the helmet. Ferda's heart began pounding and he blushed at the sight. Finally, the queen managed to drink without any problems and a faint smile formed on her face. Ferda was impressed. He wondered whether he had drunk too much wine since his primal fear had simply disappeared. Watching all the preparations, he thought that she really had gone to great lengths for an ordinary human. Ferda reflected that now that he had returned to the past, those words no longer made sense, but he continued anyway. He declared that Valdrova might not know much about him, but that he knew her well because she had given him her heart. He continued, saying that through that heart he had learned who she was. He had seen her betrayed and slandered countless times, yet she still fulfilled her duty with noble dignity. She had even welcomed those who hated her for no reason, and that nobility, the kind that never abandons what it chooses to love, had corrected Ferda's own path. Kneeling before her, he declared that there in that place he was making his vow. Just as she had given him her heart, he would now offer his to her. He concluded by saying that Valdrova was his sovereign, his everything. Ferda added that this was not written in his vow, but he still wanted to say that he felt deeply honored to be engaged to someone as beautiful as her. Beside them, Luri became emotional, holding back her tears. As the officiant, she announced that it was now the bride's turn to read her own vow. Silence. Luri called out hesitantly. "But my lady." Suddenly, Valdrova stood up. Without saying anything, she turned her back and walked away, her heavy footsteps echoing through the hall. Ferda and Luri watched in silence as the enormous gate closed behind her. A short while later, Luri announced that the engagement ceremony had been completed and that Ferda could now return. Valdrova conveyed a request. She apologized and asked whether it would be possible to grant her 3 days of seclusion. Blushing, Luri clasped her hands together, thinking to herself that this was truly befitting of her lady. She praised Valdrova, saying that knocking down that arrogant man with a single blow demonstrated a noble bearing worthy of a dragon, and claimed that she knew it had all been part of a plan. Valdrova replied that Luri had completely fooled her with that hit-and-run strategy, admitting that even she herself had not known about such a maneuver. Luri could only stammer awkwardly, unable to respond. Holding a torn piece of paper, she realized in surprise that it had not been intentional. She asked Valdrova whether she had really been looking forward to the engagement ceremony. Valdrova confessed that she had also wanted to recite her own vows like someone who was taking a consort. Luri then wanted to know why she had not done so. Valdrova admitted that she lacked confidence. Embarrassed, she revealed that she had not had the courage to look into those eyes and speak. In a memory, she recalled the sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through her in that gentle voice. When she looked at them, her mind simply went blank. Blushing in the midst of her imagination, Valdrova let out a soft groan. Watching the scene, Luri confessed that her own mind was going blank as well. Sighing, she apologized for saying such things on such an auspicious day. She warned Valdrova that in moments like this, one had to prepare for disappointment. Intrigued, Valdrova asked what that meant. Luri explained that now that Lord Ferda had officially become her fiancé, he would begin administering the East in place of the Grand Duchess. Humans began to change as soon as they gained power, just as had happened with the third prince. The queen simply watched in silence. Luri apologized for bringing up memories from decades ago, but stated that it was the best advice she could offer the great sovereign. Valdrova replied that she understood her concern. The scene closed beneath the full moon. Standing before the window, Ferda thought that mortals were beings who would one day disappear, and that it would be better to bury the uncomfortable feeling that kept trying to surface. The engagement ceremony was over. He let out a sigh, reflecting that he really had become engaged to Valdrova. Lying in bed, he felt a strange sensation run through his body. Before, hatred and anger had consumed him so completely that there had been no room to feel anything else, nor any time for it. But this time was different. He could not stop thinking about the queen's smile. His red circle began to go wild, racing uncontrollably. Confused, Ferda wondered what that emotion was. An uncontrolled circle threatens to destroy the caster himself, but if properly controlled, it can become an opportunity for growth. Determined, he headed toward the mountains, carrying a suitcase. Since this was already a peak he had reached before, climbing it again would not be difficult. A circle requires mental strength and mana, and as a first circle mage, his current mana reserves were far from sufficient. Even so, having reached the level of a great mage in his previous life, his mental strength was more than enough. Ferda decided to channel all that uncontrolled mana without wasting any of it, layering it as a second circle. His hands glowed red as he cast the spell blower, second circle. With that, he felt that he had finally taken another step toward her. Luri was surprised, asking if he had reached the second circle in only 3 days. Beside him, Luri commented that his rate of growth was impressive and asked what he had been doing locked inside his room. She asked whether red circle mages normally grew that quickly. Furta replied that they did not and that it depended on the individual. But there was a price to the growth of a red circle. With each new circle created, one had to pursue increasingly stronger stimuli, and the most intense emotion recorded by the circle would eventually merge with its wielder. Furta recalled that in the past he had awakened his circle through hatred, and even after completing his revenge he continued searching for reasons to hate. Back in the present, his eyes turned toward the new reality before him. Luri was informing him that this would be his new place of work, Lord Furta. She commented that technically he was acting with the authority of the Grand Duchess herself. Furta observed that although it was clearly a dragon's fortress, he could see signs of consideration for her fiancé in every corner of the place. Intrigued, he thought to himself, all of this because of a human. Sitting down, he declared that, as the Grand Duchess's regent, he would begin his first task. The Valdrova royal domain had been practically abandoned by her. After Furta decapitated Thessalos and exposed his crimes, the lords began watching his every move, but with Luri's help, things became easier. Furta decided that he would first send letters to the lords he had met the last time. Luri asked what he intended to write, since this would be his first formal greeting since taking office. Determined, he wrote that from then on they would be seeing each other frequently. As regent, he warned that he would begin interfering in internal affairs and that if any of them disliked his decisions, they simply did not have to respond. After all, he respected each of them. He signed it as Furta Valdrova. Satisfied, he considered the matter of the nobles settled. Now only the monsters remained, creatures that contaminated crops simply by existing, dragging countless residents to their deaths. The Grand Duchess Valdrova could contain the giant disaster-class monsters, but it was impossible to stop every smaller one. Furta concluded that he would first need to recruit the necessary talents. Luri wanted to know if he already had someone in mind. When she picked up the sheet, she looked over the names in surprise. Luri asked if that meant they would have to find the first candidate themselves. They arrived at the city of scholars, Escolaria, built around a gigantic tree. She was puzzled, wondering if that scholar was someone she had never heard of. Furta replied that it was natural for her not to know him, since he was a talent who had yet to make his mark on the world. She muttered that it would be troublesome if he started playing at governing by appointing just anyone. Luri asked if the list had not been hastily scribbled together. Furta assured her that it had not. He had spent a long time gathering that information. A memory came over him. There had been a time when Grist had been on his list of targets. Furta had dug deeply into the young man's accomplishments simply so he could hate him, searching through his failures for reasons to seek revenge. He had been so busy feeding his own hatred that the list had come from a time when he was looking for anything and everything to hate indiscriminately. Looking back now, he recognized that it had been nothing more than pure paranoia. Sitting beside Luri in front of a statue of a scholar, he remarked that the problem was figuring out how they would find the man there. A vendor shouted, calling out to the young nobleman and the young lady beside him. He offered them a sweet, assuring them that it was a snack even the academy students loved to eat when they had headaches. Furta asked if he could ask a question. He wanted to know whether many academy graduates usually passed through there. The vendor proudly confirmed that they did, saying that he had been doing business there for a long time despite the appearance of the place. Furta then asked if he knew the messy scholar. Luri pulled Furta aside angrily, asking if he was trying to make her castle even messier. The vendor laughed, admitting that the nickname was famous. He confessed that because he was always busy with his own business, he could not memorize everyone's faces. The details were a little hazy in his memory. Furta asked how much the skewers cost. The vendor announced 3 skewers for 5 coup. Furta said that one would be more than enough, but Lurian decided to take all 3. The vendor handed over the skewers, announcing his honey-preserved fruits. At the sight of the fruits, pear, strawberry, kiwi, and tangerine, Luri's eyes lit up in surprise. Furta commented that this was unexpected since he had not imagined that she liked that sort of thing. Luri became flustered, denying it like them. In a hurry, she explained that she was only making sure the information fee had been paid correctly. Furta thought to himself that he had imagined Luri as someone whose emotions were as dry as his own, but there she was, making that childish expression while nibbling on the skewer. They walked in silence for a while. Suddenly, she held one of the skewers out toward him, surprising Furta. She hesitantly asked if he wanted a piece, then embarrassed said that he could have them all. Since it was getting dark, they decided to quicken their pace. A candle flickered in the darkness. A voice warned that they might miss the right moment. Amid the thunderous crash, a young man wearing glasses fell among the rubble in a panic. Drenched in sweat, he could only mutter, "Oh no." In his mind, he lamented that all his research was going down the drain. A text revealed who he was, the student with the highest entrance score at the academy, and also its greatest failure upon graduation. A banner announced congratulations to the graduating class of the 525th class of Veritas Academy at the degree awarding ceremony. A voice called out to him, "Hey Bernal." Startled, he stammered, asking how that group had gotten in there. His name was Bernal Marquis, the messy scholar. One of the young men, smiling, grabbed his shoulder tightly, saying that after everything that had happened between them, of course they had come to see him. Another mocked him, asking how badly he had messed everything up to earn that nickname, and congratulated him on graduating. Then they informed him that it was time for him to pay them back. Cornered, Bernal could only let out a nervous laugh, sweating coldly. All of Bernal's possessions amounted to nothing but debts. A loan shark slammed his hand on the table, demanding to know when he was finally going to pay what he owed. In tears, Bernal begged for a little more time. Furious, the loan shark retorted that he had already been waiting for years since graduation, and that this had gone far beyond acceptable. Upon noticing the carcass on the table, the loan shark made a disgusted face and asked what it was. Bernal hurriedly explained that it was not an animal but a monster. He explained that his research involved recycling useless monster carcasses, transforming them into mana stones or energy sources, something difficult to obtain but which, if successful, would be of great help to the entire continent. Impatient, the loan shark cut him off. Enough with the excuses. He reminded Bernal that he had only waited because Bernal had promised that he was conducting revolutionary research, and asked whether it would make money immediately. Embarrassed, Bernal admitted that it would not, as there were still many variables to resolve. The loan shark grumbled, calling him a researcher who understood nothing about the real world. He then proposed a deal. If Bernal abandoned that research, he would give him a chance to pay off his debt. Surprised, Bernal could only ask what he meant. The loan shark suggested that he use that brilliant brain of his to research weapons, since he had heard that such research made a lot of money. After all, Bernal had ranked first in his first year at the academy. Nervously, Bernal asked if he was really talking about weapons, refusing the idea. He had other research proposals he could work on. The knife was violently slammed into the table. The loan shark reprimanded him, saying that because he had tried to be kind, Bernal thought he could do whatever he wanted, and asked whether this was really the time for him to make demands. In silence, Bernal stammered, trying to argue once again. He shouted that he could not develop weapons, begging them to give him another project. It became clear that words would not be enough. The henchman moved forward, kicking and punching Bernal mercilessly, warning him that loan sharks like them could not afford to lose even a single coin. Bruised and battered, he begged them to spare his head, willing to accept anything except that. In desperation, he thought that he was going to die right there. Then a voice interrupted everything. "That's enough." Footsteps approached. A voice remarked that he had heard alarming noises coming from outside, confirming that he had found the right place. Furta declared that he also had business to discuss with that man. The loan shark stared at the newcomer, asking whether, judging by his appearance, he was another young noble from out of town, and wanted to know if that bastard also owed him money. Furta replied that he did not. With a sigh, the loan shark told him to wait his turn, assuring him that Bernal would be beaten up but would still be able to talk. Furta narrowed his eyes. This was going to be a problem. Lying beaten on the floor, Bernal was gasping for breath. Furta declared that he did not need the man's mouth but rather his head. He offered to pay off Bernal's debt. The loan shark claimed that, with the interest, the debt had reached an astonishing 72 gold and questioned whether Furta could afford it. Luri placed a bag of coins on the table. "Of course we can." The coins spilled out, dazzling the loan shark, who admitted in surprise that there was more than enough money. He smiled, saying that Bernal was lucky to have such a wealthy sponsor. He reached for the coins, declaring that they settled the young man's debt. Luri grabbed his wrist. "Wait." Furta warned him that their deal was not over yet and asked where he thought he was putting his hand. The loan shark complained, accusing Furta of suddenly changing his mind, groaning in pain from the pressure. Furta remarked that he had clearly asked for that man's head, but after a beating like that, he doubted it would still work properly, and asked whether after damaging his property they did not owe him compensation. Indignant, the loan shark protested, "What do you mean my property? Let me go, you lunatic." He then asked how a little girl could possibly be so strong. A crack split the air as the loan shark's wrist snapped under the pressure. He screamed in pain, clutching his wrist. Furta asked Luri to take over, and she sighed, commenting that these men were hardly worth her intervention. Without the slightest bit of mercy, Luri used magic that sent all the thugs crashing to the ground. On the floor, the loan shark felt his body lock up, unable to tell whether it was magic or simply the overwhelming pressure emanating from the two of them. Furta gave them two choices. He demanded that they pay compensation for the condition they had left Bernal in, or suffer exactly what Bernal had suffered. After all, as loan sharks, they could not afford to lose even a single coin. Mockingly, he asked if they would choose the second option. The loan shark's boss gritted his teeth, sweating cold. Furta decided that they would take a good beating as payment for the compensation. Beside him, Luri's hands began glowing green, ready to act. Cries of pain echoed between the buildings. Furta and Luri walked away, beaming, leaving the defeated men crawling out of the area. Still shaken, Bernal thanked them for saving him, not knowing how he could ever repay the favor. He introduced himself as Bernal Marquis, the messy scholar, and asked for the name of the person who had helped him. Furta replied that he was Furta Valdrova. Bernal's eyes widened as he stammered, "What, V. Valdrova?" He immediately bowed, apologizing for failing to recognize the Grand Duchess's consort. Furta reassured him, saying it was only natural that he would not know and that there was no need to worry about it. He revealed that he had come there after learning about Bernal's research. Surprised, Bernal asked whether Furta was genuinely interested in his work. He confirmed that he was, explaining that Bernal researched ways to make use of monster carcasses and that the Far East was teeming with them. Furta proposed that if Bernal came to Valdrova Castle, he would support his research unconditionally. Overwhelmed with emotion, Bernal could only let out a stunned gasp. Furta assured him that he would provide any materials, funding, or facilities he needed. Euphoric, Bernal clenched his fists and cheered, while Luri whispered worriedly, asking if he was really sure about this. Quietly, Ferda added, in exchange, I need you to develop weapons based on the results of that research. Surprised, Bernal clenched his fists, unable to hide his shock. He repeated the word in disbelief. Weapons. He refused, saying that he could not accept such a thing. Weapons killed people and destroyed peace, and he wanted those lands to remain peaceful. Ferda observed that then Bernal was a pacifist. He asked whether Bernal knew how many people died because of a single monster in the Far East, referring specifically to the creatures he used as research materials. Every 3 days, the Grand Duchess went alone to the front lines, where colossal monsters awaited her. They were creatures capable of wiping out an entire city, such as Escolaria, in an instant. Whenever that happened, she was the one who faced the front lines, risking her own life. Ferda declared that anyone who was unaware of this fact was living off her sacrifice, enjoying that peace as though nothing were wrong. That was why he needed someone capable of creating weapons that could help exterminate those monsters. Only then could they ease the burden she carried alone. Holding up a scroll, he declared that this was precisely why Bernal, the man everyone mocked, would be hired as the chief researcher. Shocked, Bernal considered the proposal. Even so, he hesitated, thinking that making weapons with his own hands was an entirely different matter. In the future, Ferda knew that very man would become a scientist capable of ushering in the era of magitech, someone willing to risk even a war to protect peace. In the end, they did not receive a definitive answer regarding the proposal and continued their journey through the ring. Worried, Luri wondered if it was really right to leave Bernal behind like that. Ferda replied that it did not matter. Once Bernal sorted out his thoughts, he would come after them. Ferda commented that she seemed to really like human sweets. Luri, savoring kiwi and strawberries on a skewer, replied that she was only satisfying her hunger since they still had a long way to go. Checking the list, Ferda wondered who the next name would be. Well, I guess it'll be a member of the red-eyed race. The red-eyed race possessed eyes capable of breaking magical circles. They were known as the Bane of Mages and had been hunted until they were completely wiped out. Luri reflected that it was surprising for a bloodline believed to be extinct to still exist. She reasoned that despite their value, it would be difficult to find someone who was certainly living in hiding. Ferda asked whether they still had any extra travel funds. Luri said they had enough to fill an entire vehicle. He was certain that would be more than enough to get them through Hallam. Shocked, she repeated the name, questioning whether he really intended to go there. Hallam was known as the city of corruption and entertainment. Ferda confirmed it. The person they were looking for was a gambler. Sometime later, they arrived at a casino in Hallam. At the gaming table, hands moved over a pile of chips. The chips came crashing down, leaving a bald man in shock beside a blonde young man. Looking down at that mountain of chips, some men wondered how much it was worth and whether the man had bet every last cent he owned. The amount was nearly equivalent to an entire territory's budget. The young man reacted in surprise, standing beside a woman. Ferda and Luri approached the table. Whispering worriedly, Luri warned that the man did not have red eyes. Ferda assured her that he did. That was him. Smiling, the man introduced himself as Zed Swallow, asking if they had perhaps come looking for him. He then mischievously asked whether Ferda knew how to play poker. He warned that new challengers were always welcome. That frivolous man was the day's recruitment target. The cards fell onto the table, an ace, a 3 of spades, and a 3 of clubs. Relaxed with his arms raised, Zed celebrated, saying that he had almost made it. His cards, however, lost, and the round went to Ferda. With his arms crossed, Ferda remained silent. Zed's companion asked whether Ferda did not intend to play seriously. He admitted that luck was not always on his side and suggested that perhaps he would feel more motivated if she encouraged him. Ferda narrowed his eyes, realizing that the game was merely an excuse. Zed only cared about winning the favor of that noblewoman. Eloquent enough to charm nobles, handsome enough to please them, and skilled with his hands, Zed was like a gleaming trophy in a utopia built on money. But whenever he sensed danger, he was the kind of man who would escape quickly, like a cunning rabbit. Ferda thought to himself that it was time to cut off Zed's escape route. The dealer commented that the young master was finally getting the hang of the game. Ferda thanked him, saying that thanks to him he had enjoyed himself a little. The dealer laughed, saying it would be nice to see a friend like him around more often. Ferda warned that there would not be a next time, thinking it would be troublesome if the girl behind him started seeing him as a gambler. Zed laughed, saying that everyone said the same thing, and asked why Ferda had really come there since he understood the desire to impress a woman. Seriously, Ferda declared that he had come looking for Emilia. Just like you. Zed was stunned by what he had just heard. His expression darkened and a threatening smile formed on his face. Don't tell me you. Ferda cut him off, all in. He pushed all his chips into the center of the table, betting everything he had. The crowd whispered in disbelief, asking if he had really said all in, stunned that he would wager his entire fortune against Zed. They commented that this newcomer seemed determined to cause a scandal. Zed smiled confidently, saying that now he had to win this round no matter what. Ferda said, I call. In the background, Luri gasped in shock. Zed revealed his hand, a straight flush. He stood up, declaring himself the winner, and told the two of them to follow him. His eyes revealed an intense red. It seems we have a lot to talk about. A drink was served. Once they were alone, Zed asked how Ferda knew Emilia. Furious, his eyes glowed brown. Don't tell me you're also with those bastards. Where's my sister? Calmly, Ferda thought that, just as he had suspected, those brown eyes were merely a disguise, and declared that he had nothing to do with the people Zed was talking about. Zed repeated the nicknames people gave him with disdain: noble's plaything, gambler who practically lives in casinos, but stated that none of those things were who he really was. Looking down at his own glass, he revealed that, despite having enough power to destroy the entire casino, the reason he was content with cheap rum and serving nobles. Ferda interrupted him, "Is because you're looking for connections to help you find your younger sister, Emilia. Right?" The Swallow siblings must have suffered simply because they belonged to the red-eyed race. Mages had tried to exterminate their race, while other forces opposed them, seeking to exploit their abilities. Having lost his sister in the midst of all this, Zed must have hidden his identity and approached high society in search of help. But to nobles who valued nothing but appearance and status, he was nothing more than a source of entertainment. Ferda said that no matter how much money Zed managed to save, he would never get anywhere among those people. Desperate, Zed asked what else he could possibly do since he still hadn't found his sister and had now been exposed by Ferda as well. Ferda replied that there was another way. He introduced himself. "My name is Ferda Valdrova." As the future consort of the Grand Duchess, he offered Zed a position as his assistant. Zed's eyes widened. Valdrova. Suspicious, he questioned whether Ferda truly intended to hire him as an assistant, referring to himself as the Crimson Dragon's own gigolo. Ferda confirmed it, yes. Luri added to the offer, showing him the appointment letter and saying that she could prove it right there if he didn't believe them. Ferda assured him that if he accepted the offer, he would have a chance to enter high society and find his sister. Thoughtful, Zed reflected that an opportunity like this didn't come along every day, but he wondered whether he could really trust Ferda. He decided that the offer was tempting, but he had conditions. First, he demanded compensation worthy of his duties since he needed money. Second, he warned that if Ferda had any ulterior motives regarding his abilities, he would leave without thinking twice. Zed thought that even after saying that, now that Ferda knew who he really was, escaping wouldn't be easy. He hesitated, saying that he would rather leave the matter aside, and concluded that if his conditions were met, he would accept. Ferda agreed to both conditions, but said there was one more thing. He proposed a third condition. The contract would last until Zed found his younger sister. After that, he would be free to choose whether to stay or leave. Shocked, Zed leaned over the table and asked whether Ferda would really just let him leave without enslaving or selling him. Ferda replied that he had no interest whatsoever in buying or selling people, and that once the contract ended, Zed would be free. Zed stared at him in disbelief. "You're a mage, aren't you? A member of the red-eyed race is standing right in front of you alive. Aren't you afraid? I'm your natural enemy." Ferda shot back, calling that ridiculous. In his view, a mage who feared the red-eyed race simply because magic didn't work against them was a failure. "I'm not going to force you to stay." He thought to himself that even if he tried, there would be no way to restrain Zed. In the future, he knew that very man would become a master thief, capable of escaping from even the most heavily guarded prisons time and time again. Zed silently held his glass, then commented that Ferda was a strange noble. He gave in, saying that he understood. He downed his drink in one gulp and declared, "Ah, screw it, I'm in, my lord." He then wanted to know what his first task as the Grand Duchess's consort would be. Ferda remained silent for a moment. Then he answered, "Go seduce a woman." Zed spat out his drink in shock. He asked incredulously what that was supposed to mean. Ferda retorted that it should be easy for someone like him. He explained that all Zed had to do was bring back a woman who lived alone. Meanwhile, somewhere else, crows cawed in the distance above a house shrouded in fog. Well guys, that's all for today. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel, it really helps me out. And of course, let me know in the comments what you thought of the video. See you next time.